the big red button. I think we're ready to go. Hello, everyone. In this talk, I'm going to be talking about essentially taking on lower budget projects with Drupal, but doing so in a way where it actually makes sense and it's actually profitable. My name is Ashraf. I started Debug Academy a little over 10 years ago, where we do Drupal training from beginner to expert level, including Acquia certification training, front end and back end, all the levels. We also have architect level training. I know a lot of people here have been using Drupal for a long time. In that architect series class, it's 5 3-hour classes. Everyone who takes it tends to be a senior Drupal developer, and we pretty much go through case studies. This is how we address performance issues, etc. So you see some information about those classes here. If you want to look into our classes, you can look at debugacademy.com and click on courses. And for anyone looking to become a Drupal developer, we have a part-time 3-month course where multiple people at this Drupal camp actually went through that course. So for today's topic, if you've used Drupal, you're probably aware that it's generally not the best fit for low-budget projects. So why is that? Some of the challenges are, to work with Drupal, you generally need a high level of expertise. You need to know Composer, you should know Git. Even just to get started, you would be expected to set up a local development environment, get it onto one of the Drupal hosts, and those traditional Drupal hosts are quite expensive. Drupal 8 made a decision, or I should say the community made a decision to focus on the enterprise ever since Drupal 8. More recently that has changed a bit, but nonetheless, Drupal does require a significant amount of expertise to build the traditional way. And even when you finish building your site, just maintaining it still requires someone who really knows what they're doing. So for me, I would love it. I run a company. I would love it if my junior developers could take on the maintenance, but the reality is they can't really take on the maintenance fully. Right? If we're going from Drupal 10 to 11, you still need a senior developer in the mix to make sure it all goes well. And in Drupal, if someone gives you a design in Photoshop, Figma, whatever it may be, recreating that in Drupal, doing a pixel-perfect recreation can be pretty complicated, and it can be difficult, again, for a more junior developer to take that on, whereas with other frameworks, that may not be the case. And because of all of that, people tend to conclude small projects with Drupal, it just doesn't fit. It's just not worth it. The clients feel it's expensive to build with Drupal in the first place, and then the ongoing maintenance is also expensive, so it's not even a one-time thing. Developers and the agencies also feel the clients are not willing to put a significant, noteworthy amount of money into the project. And if we take on these projects, they become a burden on resources because we're stuck maintaining them forever. And we want to make the clients happy, and if they're not paying us enough to invest a lot of energy into the project, we are likely not going to make them happy, right? We want them to invest more, not just for profit's sake, but so that they walk away from the project very satisfied. But why are we still looking at this? Well, the opportunity is quite large. In the US, 99.9% of businesses are classified as small businesses. So 31.7 million out of 33.2 million businesses. And in this case, small business is fewer than 500 employees, but the vast majority of that 99%, almost 90% of them have 10 employees or fewer. So the vast majority of companies are very small, and it stands to reason that they need websites, and if Drupal were a good fit, then that's a significant number of projects that we're missing out on. It could be small businesses, it could be nonprofit organizations, and it can even be personal sites if the costs were low enough. That can also be part of the market. So how do we address this? It depends. So there's various angles to approach it from. I want to focus on true actionable solutions. So it depends is always the correct answer. But it depends on, there are various levers you can pull, right? So you can adjust your project's architecture. So how you build the project can affect the budget. Some clients are just not a fit for this, right? So it depends on the client, it depends on the project. The design is actually a very big part of it. The hosting can be a big part of it as well, and the project management is also a very big part of it. So you have to be aware of all of these different areas and have a cohesive solution. So what do I mean when I say the client is budget friendly? I'm not saying you need to find a client who doesn't have that much money, right? That's easy. The issue is, if you have a client with a low budget, you need to educate them. You need to educate them that out of the box means affordable, right? If they care about money, you need to really tell them out of the box equals low cost. And customized, on the other side, equals expensive. So when they ask for a feature, you can say, let's look at, and you try to train them. Out of the box means inexpensive. So you respond to every question they ask. Let's see what's out of the box. Let's see what contrib solutions there are and what is available out of the box. And when you get them into that mindset, you start to show them what is available. This is what's out of the box. Do you want to use it? And they start to hear, do you want to pay a lot by not using it? All right, so you educate them into having that mindset. And they become more flexible once they realize out of the box is how to save money. You also need to educate them that not every bug is in scope, and they do have to pay to fix bugs, because bugs are part of the out of the box picture, right? Out of the box doesn't mean out of the box the way I wish it would work, right? So this is something that, I have to re-educate the same clients about this once a year. They'll say, but that bug is one that you introduced. And if you find yourself in that situation where the client says, I don't want to pay to fix a bug, what has worked well for me is basically saying, you know what, I completely agree with your logic. It seems reasonable to say, we introduced a bug a year ago, why should you pay for it? Sounds like you don't want to do our lower cost development workflow. It sounds like you want to do test-driven development, right? If you want us to ensure there are no bugs, in theory, you first have to pay us to create our automated tests and then to do the work. And then if there are bugs after that, that's our fault, right? It means our tests are failing. That's one option. The other option is when we do development, you can also pay us to comprehensively test your system every time we release an update. But if you're not doing one or the other, you have to pay us to fix bugs. And that explanation every time has diffused the situation, and they said, fine, we'll pay for the bugs, we don't want to pay for test-driven development. Additionally, you really have to get good at managing scope. Clients will always have ideas. You shouldn't say no, you should say, that will be evaluated post-launch. That'll be our second project together. And that brings us into budget-friendly project management, which really this should always be part of project management. But especially when you're working with lower budget clients, just because their budget is low doesn't mean their ambition or vision is small. So you have to work with them to gather requirements, prioritize those requirements with them, determine what are your actual goals for this project, and divide it into multiple projects that are smaller. Right? With big clients, sometimes you have a big, North Star, this is a big product we're launching. With small, low budget clients, you really want to lean to small releases that you get paid for and that give them something that's finished and online so that they can change their mind if they don't want to continue. So, for example, I had a small nonprofit organization. They had a marketing site and they said, we want this marketing site to be built with Drupal because I know Drupal is good at managing data. We want to have various forms, we want views, we want all of this stuff. and their budget was quite limited. They did have sponsors, etc., ideas on how to increase the budget, but in the spirit of sticking to this type of paradigm, I said, okay, great, your reasons for using Drupal sound reasonable. We'll start by giving you a marketing site in Drupal, and that will be the end of that project, and we'll put it online. After it's online, we will then move on to estimating the next phase of it, right? The views, the database, etc. And I'm not talking about tricking your client into getting stuck with Drupal. Of course, I give them an idea. I tell them this is what I order of magnitude idea of what their vision entails. But I try to get to, we're building this together, we're launching it, and we're finishing that project, closing it, and then after that experience, I'm sure your ideas will evolve. We will reassess and create a second project. Same code base, but second project for the sake of billing and management. And within the projects, within each of those smaller projects, you are sometimes well served to divide it into phases, and I'll talk about this more on the design slide. But you'll want to agree on the scope, and you really need to aggressively enforce that scope. So for example, one of the developers on my team recently said, hey, I'm gonna, this nonprofit we're working with, they asked me to get on a call with them. I'm gonna do that, are you fine with that? And I said, yes, except if they, yes with the caveat, if they ask you for anything that we are not already planning to do, either say, let me get back to you on that, or say, we need to stick to our scope, but this can be part of the next project, right? Because we don't want to go back and forth on replanning, adjusting budget, anything like that. The biggest problem that you have with low budget clients is saying yes too much. They say, I want this thing, it's very small, right? Just change the color of that button. And it's never small, because you find out the button actually comes from the user profile, and the user profile field comes from like their birth month or something, and you weren't storing the birthday. There's always layers behind every feature request. So they tend to actually appreciate it if you hold that line and you give them something, and you're open to continuing in the next phases. And if they ask you for something that you're not doing right now, they also tend to appreciate it if you write it down, and after the project's finished, you remind them of it. That also makes them feel heard. And if it's a low budget client, to the point where low has to be bold and italicized, very low budget, consider saying that explicitly, custom module development is not part of MVP, it's not part of phase one. And that takes the whole out-of-the-box statement one step further, right? We're sticking to out-of-the-box, so much so that custom modules are not even in scope. If something needs a custom module to happen, that's a separate mini conversation we can estimate. And again, we're talking about low budget clients. They generally are going to be aware that they are low budget, and they should be open to making trade-offs, and if they're not, they might not be the right client. Remember, the right client, the right project is also part of the puzzle. Now, budget-friendly design, when you do the design, makes a big impact on the budget of a Drupal project. What has worked best for me with, again, these very low-budget clients is first build the project without a design. It sounds counterintuitive. We usually go requirements and design first. But for the lowest budget, you go requirements and site building first. We build the pages, we lay everything out, so it looks presentable, right? You use Layout Builder, you give them 2 column, 1 column, you put your headings and such, but you don't give them a design. Even better if you have some sort of vanilla, strip out Drupal's default colors, right? You replace the blues with a gray in the header. But the point is, you don't give them a design. It's essentially, you actually do build the Drupal site, and it ends up looking like a wireframe. And once you get to the point where the client says, yes, this is the data I want, these are the content types, yeah, those are the pages I want, etc. Once you get them to agree to that, then you take it to the designer, and you show the designer the site. Better yet, you get a designer who knows HTML and CSS, and you basically say, hey, I need you to design this. Here's their brand guidelines, whatever it may be. I need you to design it and do your best to make it so we don't have to change the HTML. And there are going to be exceptions to that, but if the designer knows HTML and CSS and they work within that constraint of we're not going to revamp the HTML, of course this requires a special type of designer. And probably worth commenting, these low budget projects tend to be best served by a generalist, right? A developer who can do back end and front end. Maybe it's hard to get a designer who is the same person, but a designer who knows HTML and CSS, right? You need to know people. You need people with. They don't need to be architect level, but they need to have experience in the different areas to be able to make the cost saving decisions. So, and I've worked with designers who had this skill set. Right? They would oftentimes design the site directly in Webflow because that has HTML and CSS access. Yeah, essentially, you build the site, you give you give a link to the site to the designer, and you ask them to make it look better. And then your themers go and implement their changes. And when you do that, the cost of implementing the design is drastically lower. And finally, the hosting is also a big part of the puzzle, because more so than hosting is maintenance, but those two are part of the puzzle. In terms of hosting, I'm skipping over the traditional Drupal host altogether because it's hard to make it fit for very low budget projects. But one of the options is self-hosting. You can get a VPS, you can go to a shared host, you can just upload Drupal. Your host may or may not have Composer access. The pros and cons of self-hosting. Pros, there are not necessarily limitations depending on what host you pick. The cost of hosting is lower. The cons are that you need to know how to manage hosts, you need to know how to manage the server, and you have to do the ongoing maintenance. So server maintenance, Drupal maintenance is all on you. Drupal is a host that we launched. So it's coming out of Debug Academy, but we launched the beta launch at DrupalCon. If you're familiar with Drupal Gardens, it's somewhat similar to Drupal Gardens, but kind of built on Drupal CMS with a handful of additional modules and custom theming put on top of it. So with Drupal, you get lower cost hosting, much lower. It can be as little as $10 a month. And one of the big keys is Drupal, because it's more like a Drupal Gardens, it handles all of the Drupal upgrades. So it'll take you from Drupal 10 to 11 and so on. So you don't have to do any of the maintenance or upgrades. You just build the site. Downside is the limit, like Drupal Gardens, you're limited because you don't have access to Composer and you don't have the ability to write custom modules. So it's a good fit for the small projects where the client is flexible enough. If you need a contributed module that's not available, you can reach out and it can be added to the platform. And finally, static site hosting is another option, very inexpensive potentially, and I will talk more about that on the upcoming slides. Now, those hosting options, they actually drive your architecture to some extent, right? If you build a site and you plan on it being on Drupal, it's not the same as if you just build a site and you plan on hosting it on Acquia, right? You're restricted in some of your decisions. And same if you decide to make it a static site, once again, you can't just build freely the same way you normally would. There are some other architectural considerations as well. I recommend for these low budget sites, start with Drupal CMS, apply all of the recipes that are appropriate for your project. Again, within reason, declare custom modules out of scope, or at least as add-on items that need to be charged for independently. And in terms of building out your entire site, you have to build with one of these in mind. Are you going to host this as a static site? Are you going to host it on something like Drupal? Are you going to use the automatic upgrades module? And I'll talk about how those impact the architecture. So let's say you decided to build a static site, or you decide to host as a static site. Things you have to be aware of. When it's a static site, that really means it's going to be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So PHP will not work. So for example, if you use the contact form module and you put a contact form on the site, that will not work. Because contact form makes a server-side PHP request, that won't work if it's a static site. So all of your forms must not submit to the database, and they must not submit to PHP. You should use client-side, typically third-party form solutions. So for example, a newsletter, you can use MailChimp. But that doesn't mean that every MailChimp option is okay. If you use a Drupal module that is MailChimp, it may still use PHP to submit to the actual MailChimp, so that would not be good enough. You have to use something like a MailChimp embed code, HTML embed. That will work on a static site. So all of your forms, if you have a comment section, again, that would be an embed. And if you go with the static site approach, when you want to make content updates on your site, you generally that'll require developer intervention. The developer will need to restore it to a regular Drupal site. You make your content updates, you export it to static again. And eventually, even though you can host a static site forever without issue, if you want to make updates from time to time, you might want to upgrade Drupal. Right? You might build your static site in Drupal 9. Now it's Drupal 11. You want to make a content update. Now you have a decision to make. Do I restore to Drupal 9 and get that working locally, or do I upgrade to Drupal 11? You have a decision to make. So from time to time, you still might need to do that maintenance work. So if you made that decision, here's how you would do it. Build the site locally with Drupal. Again, don't allow any forms to submit using PHP. Use client-side embeds for all of your forms. Be aware that on this site, your visitors won't be allowed to log in or create accounts. After you create your site, you can use the tome module to export to HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And you'll get that static site with no database. And just upload it anywhere. You can go to Netlify or any one of those inexpensive hosts that is designed for those static sites. And those can be very inexpensive. If you wanted to go the automatic upgrades route, that's a module that's in Contrib and being added to core. Make sure you read the fine print, right? The automatic upgrades module, at the moment, it does not work through cron, so you do still have to log in and push a button, which is fine, but it only does patch updates. So it won't take you from 10.1 to 10.2. It'll take you from 10.1.0 to 10.1.1. See, so it won't do the middle digit. And of course, it won't do the major digit either. So the reality is it's great for like security updates. If you want to quickly pop in and give me the 0.1 security update, but it doesn't replace maintenance. You still have to go in when it comes time to go from 10.1 to 10.2, you still have to go in and upgrade the same way you always have been, as though you're not using automatic upgrades. Also, this doesn't work with things like Acquia. I don't think it works with Pantheon. You would likely have to do your custom hosting. So you have to maintain the host, the server. So I love the idea. I don't think it actually ends up saving you that much yet. But again, it's good for security updates. So if all the sites have a minor security update, you can jump in, push the button on all the sites, and move on. Now the process with automatic upgrades, again, you can build the site locally or however you would normally do it. No restrictions on what modules you use. Host the site on a non-traditional Drupal host. The host needs to be able to give Drupal permission to overwrite itself, overwrite its own code base, so that the module can update it. When it's time to actually process updates, you first should manually update your site, and then you press the button. When there are larger updates, do them the classic way. And then the Drupal option, again, it's sort of like Drupal Gardens. The considerations with this one, again, you're limited in terms of which modules you can use. But no local development environment, no environment setup. You just click start, you get like 1 week free, and you can start building your site. You don't have access to PHP or Composer, but the site is fast and optimized. You get Memcache, Varnish, CDN, so it's enterprise in terms of performance out of the box. The maintenance and upgrades are performed automatically, so you don't have to worry about taking away your developer's time after the project finishes. The cost is quite low. So the approach for that, you start by creating the site through the UI. When you create the site, it's Drupal CMS. You'll see recipes. It's in beta right now. You will see the Drupal CMS recipes, but more and more recipes will be added. You do have access to Drush commands through the dashboard. So if you want to use Drush ULI, if you're managing a bunch of sites, you can actually go to your dashboard, choose a site, choose Drush ULI, Drush CR, etc. There's various commands you can run. Build your site in the UI, write your CSS and JavaScript in the UI, and eventually experience Builder through the UI as well. And it takes care of the maintenance automatically. So what traditionally would be a burden can become a profit center. Right? If you're paying Drupal $10 a month or whatever it may be, you could charge the client whatever you think is appropriate, 20 to 100 a month, whatever it may be, and you're still providing them some value because you're their point of contact. If anything needs to change, if they think something went wrong, you're still the person they reach out to, but you don't have to go do security updates or any other updates. And if you ever want to leave, you can export your site and self-host it or take it somewhere else. And if your client grows, and one of the reasons we do these projects is some of these clients are small for now, right? So, or their small project is their way of getting to know you, right? So you could build your site here, do the small site, and eventually they say, hey, you know what, this worked out better than we expected. We actually have paying customers now. Can you do this? And it requires a custom module. At that point, you can export, you can take it to a traditional host or host it yourself, whatever it may be. So I have a few examples from my company where the clients were very low budget, and I'm going to go over what we did and how we handled it. So one of these is a nonprofit organization that held an online film festival, which is actually really cool. They talked with movie producers, they got the right to stream the movies live, and it's a very interesting project. And it was a one-time film festival. It needed to be, on Drupal live during the actual film festival, but after that, they just kind of wanted it to be archived. So the plan from the beginning was we're going to build this in a way that it can be turned into a static site. This also needed custom modules. So we did this, traditional hosting for the 1 month where it actually had a lot of traffic. And the film festival went great. It was really cool, really interactive. All of the forms on the site were implemented client-side. All the sign-ups, newsletter, etc. It was all client-side. So when the festival ended, we used the Tome module. We exported it to HTML and CSS, uploaded them to a much cheaper host, and that's where they'll be forever. We don't expect them to need content updates. No. So that worked out very well. Debugacademy.com. So this site is actually a lot more complicated than what it looks like. We use this for assigning tasks to our employees, assigning homework to students, creating classes, etc. And when an employee finishes a task, it automatically emails an invoice to the customer. So it's got a lot. But because it has so much custom code, it's not a fit for Drupal. Because students need to log in, it's not a fit for static sites. So for this one, we just went with custom hosting. We didn't feel like automatic upgrades adds enough value right now to be one of the sites that's testing it. So we're just sticking with manual maintenance and no real way around it. Right? We do what we can to keep the project low cost in the other ways I described. Obviously, we are the client for this one, but just in terms of decisions we make, we try to stick to the HTML Drupal gives us and keep things simple that way. another nonprofit organization. This is a very small nonprofit. It had 2 employees at the time. The site, it does get updated, but infrequently. Content editors want to be able to log in and change things, upload a new PDF without talking to a developer. The budget was pretty low. The client was very flexible in terms of their requirement. For this one, Drupal is a good fit. In fact, and it's because it's low cost hosting, no maintenance, right? And they don't have much money for maintenance, even if they're willing to invest, thousands of dollars one time, or even $10,000 one time. They're not willing to invest, hundreds of dollars a month. So it was worth it to get that one-time payment for doing the work, and then we don't need to make much money on the ongoing maintenance. So that's where it was a good fit. Drupal's only been around for 6 months or so. Whenever DrupalCon is when the beta launch was. So the reality behind this one is this was not built on Drupal. It was built 3 years ago. And given how small of a nonprofit they are, and their staff's always changing, we built the site for them, we gave it to them for a review, and they said, we'll get back to you. They didn't get back to us for more than a year. And that happened again. They're like, oh, here's some more fixes. Yeah, here's some more fixes. Can you adjust these? And then I think we're ready. So we adjusted them, we showed it to them, and then they disappeared for 2 years. And they contacted us like 3 weeks ago. And given all the Doge stuff, we have some downtime for some of our staff. But they contacted us and they're like, hey, I'm the new person at this nonprofit. Now I want this site launched. And so this is where I said, okay, we're going to really, follow these guidelines, right? You're not allowed to ask for anything new. We finished what we said we were going to finish. Let's launch it. We can talk and determine estimates and whatever. But I don't want to launch a 3-year-old site without performing security updates, so now I'm in a tough spot. And because it's such a small site, I said, while they spin their wheels and while my employee is not on a project, rebuild it in Drupal, because we don't want to do this again in a year. So this ultimately is being built in Drupal because of just how the nature of that type of work and the fact that we don't want to have to maintain it again. So this is being built there. Another, common example, there are a few personal blogs, and obviously for a personal blog, generally speaking, you're very flexible on the design, you're flexible on the requirements, out of the box is okay. You don't want to spend a lot of money on it. Static may sound fun, but you may not write new blog posts if you have to keep restoring a static site. So this is another use case for Drupal where we're hoping experienced Drupal people who just like to use Drupal will just spin up a site, take it as far as they like, and it becomes their personal blog, and they're not, spending too much money, and they're also not hosting an insecure site. And it's got CDN and all that, so it's very fast. So some people, are already using this. And in terms of the custom module piece, we do have the ECA module. So, it's event, condition, action, I believe. So you can actually sort of have custom backend-like functionality. It's just you can't write it in PHP. And yeah, that's pretty. Probably should have had a wrap-up slide, but but that's the general idea. We actually have taken on numerous very low-budget clients with Drupal over the years, and they do tend to fall into those 3 buckets for the most part. Right up front we say, is this going to be static? Is it going to be, custom hosts where you have to pay a little for maintenance, but you don't have to pay, some of these, they don't care that much about security, so maybe you have to pay some for maintenance, but not as much as the hosting cost. And then there's the Drupal option where it's like, okay, we can go as low as $10 a month. We can go a little higher if we want to make some profit just for maintaining the relationship and being the point of contact. So I hope that that you got some useful information out of this. Tried to not let it just be a sales pitch. I hope it didn't feel like too much of one. But yeah, like I said, the static site is a solution we still use on projects today, and with Drupal CMS, I didn't really mention it, but I think most people here know, Drupal CMS also cuts a lot of the development time and makes it easier to deliver more affordably. With the Drupito, I just said I'm trying not to make the sales pitch, but I'm going back on that. You can try it out. Go to drupito.com. You sign up, you press a button, and you get a free 1-week trial. And then you can, the site will delete itself if you decide not to keep it. And right now it's in beta because we're still working out some of the theming capabilities, but you do have access to writing custom CSS. And if you sign up during beta, you do keep that $10 a month pricing forever. Okay, with that said, let me know if there's any questions about any of these projects or anything else I've talked about. Yes?
Could you estimate if you like just percentage of hours spent from a dev on the build first and then file the ugly off versus a traditional design process for Drupal?
Yeah, and I'll answer this, but a lot of developers in the room, so I'd love for other people to also answer this. So the question was about, how does it compare in terms of whether you design first and implement the design, or if you implement first and then apply the design. It largely will depend on the designer, right? Because the designer is a very key piece of that. Because if you build first and then you get a design made by someone who doesn't know HTML, they will still create complexity that doesn't need to be there. With that said, in my experience, I've been on projects where they gave us a design that just doesn't match Drupal, but it's beautiful and we implement it and we spent the vast majority of the project on the design, like 80%. Been on projects where we go the component library route first and do all of that, and then you integrate it with Drupal. And then I've been on projects where we do what I described here, which is build first and then add CSS. I don't think it's crazy to say that it's like 80% faster. Like it's very, very significant, because it's not just about like how much code are you typing or not typing. It's also about who can do it. Because if you take the route of build first and then implement CSS, a junior developer or junior intermediate developer who knows CSS, they can do it even if they don't know Drupal. And that also can bring your costs down, as opposed to having a senior Drupal developer, senior themer involved in every single build. But that is one where, does anyone else have like an opinion or thoughts? You can think out loud. I'm curious what other people's thoughts are on that. How much faster would it be if
that's obviously what they're trying to achieve with Drupal CMS.
Yeah,
bring it down to these type projects, and so I think you've got a smart idea of still a pain in the ass to maintain Drupal CMS just as much as it is Drupal. So if you can handle that, I think you can have some success. But as far as building a site, it seems like it'd be much faster and be much more able to compete with WordPress.
Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts from anyone?
I've got a question.
Yes.
Do you do migrations into Drupal? Is it possible? And then I guess it would be a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, it's possible and case-by-case. So most likely, if you wanted to prepare your site to be migrated into Drupal, you can pretty much compare it to Drupal CMS. Turn off all modules that are not in Drupal CMS, and then get in touch with us.
This is slow.
Yeah. I
would like to.
And we are actually. Honestly, and that's why I gave the example earlier. I told my developer to rebuild the site, right? I didn't tell them to migrate it. With hindsight, I'm wondering if maybe I should have let them migrate some of it. But yeah, we are working on a migration path, even a Drupal 7 migration path, where at least you get the content into Drupal. Because I'm one of the, I signed up to be one of the migration partners on Drupal.org, and the leads there have not been worthwhile. Most months you get 0 in the small business category, but I've gotten over 6 months, I've gotten 3 that were $500 to $2,000, where they're like, we want a full rebuild. And,
11,
yeah, so for that, we've been looking at like, okay, but those clients they fit the profile. They're like, we only have this much money. We don't care what it looks like at all. We just don't want to lose our data.
Yeah.
So for them, I'm looking at, okay, let me see if I can migrate you into Drupal, and maybe I'll give you your 5 landing pages, but you have your data. And Drupal 7, people used to stand up a site and build it themselves. So I'm looking to give them that again. I'll put your data into Drupal. You don't have to worry about Composer or Git, but you've used Views before. You can finish building it. If your budget is $500, you can build the site yourself. We'll just put your data there. So that is something we're working on. And also, like I said, the more recent version of Drupal to Drupal, we're working on that too, but the way we've envisioned it so far has been pretty much you turn off the custom modules and get your data in, and then you go in and finish the build.
So I haven't memorized what's in Drupal CMS. Does that mean you're shipping with AI tooling out of the box too?
It does have the AI modules, the Drupal AI, and you have it has like a very limited API key in there with like a few dollars a month that you're allowed to use just for free, and you can switch it with your own API key. And also, like, I know some hosts, when you start up a site, email doesn't work, but we do have SendGrid integration with our API key. Once again, we basically put in limits, so if you're using a lot of email, you should switch to your own API key. So there's certain areas in the interface where we alter forms and we say, hey, like, you want to use Drupito's API key, or you want to switch it to your API key. So, yeah, we're still in the beta, so you're going to see things here and there, but yeah, we've been thinking it through to where it will work on as many projects as possible. Also, we are working on supporting fully decoupled. So if you want to use Drupito for Drupal and your API and all that, but then you want to use whatever, React, and get a fully decoupled front end, that's actually something that we've fully figured out. So that's on the
That
roadmap
seems
too.
like a small budget thing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's
Unless
true.
The guy running it, or girl, just happened to have a lot of React experience, and they
Exactly,
do that.
exactly.
They don't know anything about the back end.
Yeah, but it's still an order of magnitude less.
Exactly. The maintenance of Drupal eats up so much of the budget and time, and we've taken that part away. So it makes Drupal more viable as a decoupled option. So, the $10 a month option is for the small sites. We do hope that eventually, there will be a mix. Maybe it's not the small sites only. Maybe it's the sites that are willing to live without custom modules.
How would you classify a low-budget site? I mean, like, there's cost-wise is one, but I guess
Yeah.
that's probably it depends.
Right.
But hours-wise, like, what would you say is on average? I know it varies between site to site, but
Yeah.
keep that within the low budget.
So a big part of my thinking on it is, one is the maintenance. Is this client willing to invest, like how many hours a month is this client willing to invest in maintenance? If it's less than 1, and the reality, when I talk about maintenance, I'm talking about security updates. And the reality is, like, 1 billable hour for a senior developer is more than what a lot of these low budget clients are willing to pay every month, right? Maybe during the build, sure, but not forever. Because they're comparing to WordPress and Wix and Squarespace. They don't have to pay those sites $100 a month to host their.
It's automatic updates work.
Exactly. So that's actually a big part of who I'm comparing. Even none of these clients that I mentioned here, these very small nonprofits, none of them are willing to part with $150 a month just to keep the site online. They want to pay $20 a month, So that's actually my criteria. It's more the ongoing maintenance is my litmus test as to whether it's worth building with Drupal. But in terms of the actual build, I've actually found some of those clients who don't have money, like a nonprofit, a small nonprofit. They may not have money in general, but they might be willing to get money for their project one time. Yeah. So like some of these clients who are not willing to pay $100 a month, they will come and say, hey, I have $10,000 because a donor said, we're going to fund this one-time project for you. But they won't fund maintenance. They don't want to fund overhead. So you can get 10,000, you can get $30,000 sometimes. So it's just a matter of making Drupal make sense to them and making them feel like their 10,000 isn't going down the drain. You know, so it can still be worth it if you work within these types of constraints. Any other questions or thoughts? All right, thank you.